Well, during Child Protection Week, there are more indications that around 60% of our children suffer what mental health experts call an adverse childhood experience or traumatic or stressful situation before the age of 17. These include incidents of violence, the threat of violence, being separated from family for a very long time, incidents like that. Dr. Wisani, Makhomisane, is a member of the SA Society of Psychiatrists. Dr. Makhomisane, good afternoon to you and thank you for your time. What kind of incidents are our children suffering from?
Afternoon, Stephen, and thank you for having me. I think this year we focus more on what we call silent trauma, the trauma that gets missed. So, we have big trauma like, if a child is involved in a car accident and someone passes on, it's almost as if we expect that there could be PTSD. But these events that we're talking about, it's the silent events. And some of these events it's not something done on the kid, it's something that a child would observe. For example, if parents are fighting, physical fighting, for example, a child is still traumatized by that, even though it did not happen to the child. But also absence of parents, whether parents are busy, whether parents have mental illness, or whether parents have substance misuse problems. So the child will then have neglect, and from that, then they will develop this type of traumas.
How do our children compare with children in other countries? Obviously, it depends who you compare them with, but clearly a large proportion of our children have this kind of incident.
Yes, I think it's always difficult to compare us to other countries. It's like apples and bananas in the sense that, remember, there's what we call that trauma is generational or it's transmittable, because trauma has the ability to change one's genetic makeup. So when in psychiatry, we think of genes, but we think of environment, and we call it epigenetics. So the environment can activate or silence specific genes. So if you look at where we come from as a country, the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there's a lot of trauma that happened and that has activated or silenced certain genes. So we might appear as having more trauma symptoms than other countries that maybe had less trauma overall.
I presume that the impact of all of this, you talk about PTSD, it means it's a very long-term impact. A thing that can happen to a child at a young age stays with them.
Yes, in this sense. How the brain works is that if you play tennis every day, the neuronal connections that will be strong will be the tennis playing ones, and you become good. So whatever you do often, that's what gets strengthened. Now, if what happens often is fear and fighting, and that's what you do, so what it means is that a child grows up in an environment where they feel as if they are being chased by a lion every time. And so they are hyper-vigilant, almost edgy and always on the go. So even when you put them in a quiet, safe environment, they are still on the go. These are the kids where a friend will be playing with them in the playground and they'll maybe hold their back and that child will hit the other child. They hit because they are always on alert and always on the go. So they even misinterpret calm and playful events as more attacking. And it stays with them. And the reason why we have a lot of depression currently in South Africa, a lot of depression in adults, a lot of anxiety, even chronic diseases such as hypertension and diabetes, because it eventually gets into that. It's because we're a generation that had a lot of trauma that was missed, and we grew up in very agey, always on the go environments. And eventually when we are adults now, we deal with these conditions and we have no clue where it comes from. Someone will say, I grew up in a good home, and they did grow up in the good home, but in the good home, there were silent traumas that the parents did not even know were traumas.
We're always talking about the amount of violence in our society, and I wonder if, I presume that what happens is that when a child goes through this kinds of incident, they then, as they grow up, inflict violence themselves, then that is then inflicted on children who then inflict it as adults. And so my point is, we talk about violence in our societies. We have a pattern of violence that's really difficult to try and resolve. If you can have a generation with far reduced incidence of violence, you could make a big difference.
Yes, you definitely can. So if I am a child and I'm observing violence, either I'll be more the anxious child, the worried world, the one who's always fearful, or I'll be the one who's always on the go, who will eventually become the perpetrator. So I think if we control the violence, whether it's what children observe, whether it's what they experience, because there are children where, Stephen, between home and school, they're not sure if they're going to make it. whether it's sexual assault, whether it's being robbed and a cell phone being taken, or whether. So these kids are always hyper vigilant. So sometimes it's not in the home, as in the yard, but it is in the community around them. And it doesn't matter where it is. Sometimes it's at the school. But the issue is that our kids are exposed to this trauma, and this is silent trauma that our communities don't even know that it is trauma. And that is why, as a country, we're struggling. So correct, if we can try with this generation, try and educate and minimize the trauma, then, our children, by the time they are adults, will probably do better than us.
The other thing you could do, maybe, I don't know if this is possible, is if we know that our children suffer from a very high incidence of this, is not just to prepare them for it. That sounds kind of wrong, but I think maybe we have no choice. But also to help them deal with it afterwards. And what I'm trying to suggest is that we have a generation of children. If we know they're going to have this problem, maybe the intervention also needs to be about, as children growing up, how to care for themselves, how to care for each other as well, so that the incidents, that the trauma isn't re-perpetuated.
Yes, I think first and foremost with education is to try and prevent. So the more we talk about this in shows such as this, then we make the adults who are around the kids be more aware. Because sometimes I'm a strict mom and I believe I just want my kids to stay in school. But if my child is very anxious, me being strict puts that child, it makes the child feel like, they are in danger. And I might not even notice that I am doing that. I'm still a loving mom, but I'm too strict for that child because children are different. But I think first and foremost, let's try and prevent. So let's educate the parents, the teachers, the religious societies and everyone to say, you don't have to hit with this to be abusive. Abuse can be neglect. If mommy is always busy or daddy is always busy, they are never home, the child might feel neglected. Once we teach and to prevent, then we go on, and especially at schools, teachers are very good and teachers are very good with kids. They're able to pick up that little Wisani is not the same as last week. Then we give teachers permission to be able to reach out to the parents to say, I noticed little Wisani is not like this. But then teachers also get to talk about this at school, and, they normalize opening up and reaching out, and, the bullies that would end up being bullies, then they learn to see this situation from the child of the one who would be the victim. So I think we just need to get talking,
Dr.
as a community.
So much to talk about there. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Wisani. Makhomisane is a member of the SA Society of Psychiatrists, one of the big issues facing our society, of course.